Hello. Well, with this is the ds-incubator today with Alex leading the meetup. So go ahead, Alex.
Okay, so I'm going to jump right into it, starting from where we left off with Maro's thing last time. I'll run basically the last command he ran, and then we'll start moving forward from there.
Great. I will remind you of things that I often forget, like for example sharing the screen, and also when it's about 10 minutes to the end of the meetup.
Thank you so much. Okay, screen is sharing now. This is going. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes, we see your
Awesome.
browser.
And while we're at it, since I am sharing my screen, don't worry about raising hands, just like throw questions out loud. I'm going to keep talking, but if you have questions, please talk over me. Okay, so let me crack open. This is just my notes for today. So last time we ran this, we had a, where'd that go? Okay. Last time we ran this docker run -d password is your password -rm -p 87878787 Rocker RStudio. And so just to break that down real quick, what that looks like. Docker is the name of the tool that we're using. Run is the command that we're telling Docker to run something. Rocker RStudio is the name of what we want to tell it to run, and it defaults to the latest tag. We can talk about tags later, but it's just a way to distinguish between different versions of the same image. So, for example, Rocker releases a new tag whenever there's a new version of R that is released. So they tag all of their images with the different versions of R. So if we wanted to go back and run R 3.7, we could do that by changing the tag. But by default, it just grabs whatever is the coolest, greatest, latest thing. And now this stuff in the middle. So -e is saying, I want to pass an environment variable to the container that I'm spinning up. And that environment variable is going to be, the name of the variable is password, the value is going to be your password. I'm assuming everyone is at least somewhat comfortable with the idea of an environment variable, that it's something that affects the entire operating system. The -rm flag means remove everything after we're done with this. Basically clean up after ourselves so we don't have to go do that later. And -p8787, this is saying the container is going to be expecting to get connections on the TCP port 8787, which gets into the depths of like Unix networking stuff. But a good way to think of ports is as doorbells, like the buzzer at the outside of an apartment building. If you want to get to one person, you would buzz door 20. If you want to get to the person who lives in the RStudio, you would buzz door 8787. And then that starts the connection and takes it from there. And so what this is doing is saying, expose port 8787 from this container and make it this, whenever someone on the host computer tries to connect to port 8787, connect to the Docker container instead. Questions on this breakdown of this command real quick?
Yeah, is your password actually a string that is your password? Is that a placeholder for what the password is? Is it the name of a environment variable that contains your password, or what is?
Right, yes. So when it's in this form, it is saying that the password, the environment variable password is set to the literal string your password. So
inside the Docker.
Inside the Docker container, we'll see that here in a second. But I'm going to hit go. I'm not seeing any errors pop up, which means it's time to connect. So I go to localhost, which is the name of my apartment building on my computer. And I'm going to ring doorbell 8787, and it pops in. And RStudio, and now it's YOURPASSWORD. And sign in, and we get to a nice, looks like the RStudio we know and love, except it's running in a web browser. This is where, if I remember correctly, Mauro left it at the end of the last session. Questions on anything we've done so far today?
Alex, I'm trying to understand a little bit more about the environment variable, but I'm still not 100% sure whether I get it or not. So maybe you can say a few words on it?
Yeah, so an environment variable is... Environment variables can be tricky things, but they don't have to be. The simplest way to think of it is as a post-it that is defined for the whole computer, or for the whole machine, to be a little more accurate. So I can go into my computer, and get a list of all of the environment variables on my computer. This is for my MacBook Air. Okay? If you were to do the same thing, you would get a different list of environment variables because they are specific to the environment in which they are being run. And so what we're doing with this, Dashi is saying pass an environment variable, is saying when we're firing up this new Docker container, when we do Docker run, that is creating a new little machine inside our normal machine. So it's a box within a box, basically. And inside that box is going to have this environment variable already defined.
So the password that you set there can be any arbitrary thing. It could be 123, and then if you set that as 123, then when you logged in RStudio. So what that implies is that there's also something going on inside of this Docker that when it runs RStudio server, it checks for the environment password, and if it finds it there, then it takes that environment variable and makes that the actual password of the RStudio server.
Yes. So if we look here, this is in the same way that I just got the list of environment variables for my MacBook. Here is the list of environment variables inside that Docker container.
But it doesn't have password.
It does not have password, and I'm wondering if it is masking it in some way.
Yeah, probably.
But this is the concept, is by altering the values of environment variables, you can change the behavior of programs. Our programs, definitely, but other programs as well.
Is it possible that we, just as an example, that we use another environmental variable just to see how it looks like?
Let's take a look at what that might look like later, but
Okay.
definitely. If we have time, I would definitely like to touch on that.
Perfect.
But as an example here, here is like a home variable. So home is saying where is the home directory for this user. If this were at a different path, then we would have a different home directory. We'll take a look later at what that actually looks like in practice. But for now, I'm going to kill this. So I do Control-C in my terminal, sends a kill signal. Docker will take a second to shut it down, but now it's ready and it's done. I can go back to the web browser and we can see it's gone. Cool. So a thing we didn't talk about last time, I don't want to talk about it in detail this time, is this concept of a volume mount. But basically it is a way, so if I look at my directory structure here, I've got my README and I've got this directory here called R. Might be easier if I show it here, ds-docker. Okay, so I've got this folder called R, and in the folder is script1.r. It's just got some goofy little R functions in it. Awesome, neat. So if I take my next command here, and I'm not breaking it down too much, it's mostly the same. The only difference here is this ugly business of --mount, type is bind, source is print working directory /r, target is home RStudio R, and then we move on with our lives. So what this is going to do, actually I'm going to cancel that, and just real quickly, I am going to change this. Alex is great. Funny. Yeah. Okay, so the new password to get into this thing is going to be Alex is great because we have changed that environment variable, just as a quick demonstration. So I reload this page, RStudio, Alex is great, and it's now able to log in. Does the example of changing the environment variable has an effect on the system in Docker? Does that make sense to us right now? Not hearing complaints, so I'm going to move along. But the big thing we can notice is right here, hey, this folder was empty before, now it's got this R with the script that we opened up in it. So what this is doing is the volume mount is taking a folder from my computer, my MacBook, and making it available inside the Docker container. This is one of a couple of ways, but it's a very useful way to get stuff from the host machine into the container. It's also a good way to get stuff from the container back to the host machine. So let's just...
So does this work because RStudio server is dropping you in a project and its default project location is some directory that you happen to know which it is?
So the way that this is working is, so the source is what is the folder on my MacBook. So that is, print working directory is wherever I am right now, /r means I want to mount the R directory, that is wherever I am. And then target is where do I want that to be mounted inside the container.
Yeah.
And so
you happen to know in this case that this directory on the Docker home RStudio will exist, or home RStudio will exist, and you also know that RStudio server will view that as like the default folder for an undefined project?
Correct. Because just jump back here. When we looked at the home, directory, that is where this system defaults to working in. So we have opened up or created a new directory R underneath this home directory. Anyway, this line written inside the container, I can hit save, and the cool thing is if I open up that on my MacBook, we get that same line. So this allows, you can control whether you want to be able to pass information back and forth, but this is a tool that does allow us to move files back and forth from the container to the host and vice versa.
Just heads up, that is 20 past.
Wow, time is flying by. Okay. So,
sorry, I know it's, anyway, this is a good time to point out that many Linux are not case sensitive, and usually Windows and Mac are, so if you change this script to script 1 point lowercase r, then you start having weird problems.
Agreed, but that is there's nuance in that thing that I don't want to get into right now. Anyway, so a thing that is a fact of pretty much most Unix-based operating systems is there is a history of the commands that you ran somewhere. For me, I can open up a file called histfile, and that didn't work because I tried to open it up in the wrong way, but it is just a list of the 10,000 most recent commands you ran on the terminal. So it's sensible that maybe we don't want to be putting passwords into that history file. So for security, we can create a file called .env, where we define the environment variables that we want to have running in there. And I will open that up here. So I've got 2 variables in here, password and cool variable, coolvar. I'm just going to close that for a minute. And so what this here is, instead of passing -e password to your password, I'm passing -n file is .env. You want to add the environment variable file, the env file, to your git ignore. That is very important because it generally is going to have sensitive information in it. But if I close this thing again, wait 5 seconds, and now run this one, and it fires up, and it asks me to refresh our studio, and oh boy, what did I...
It was foobar.
Was it foobar? Foobar, thank you. Maro paying attention for me. And hey, look at that, it's loading. And if I look at the list of environment variables here, it should have coolvar is production, just like what I had in my environment file. Okay? Does the concept of an environment file of the env file make sense? Of this is the place where if there is anything that you don't want to have a record of, so passwords, certain paths, anything that maybe could be a secret, should go in there and it should get ignored. Cool. Okay, lightning round to the actual point of this one. So I also have like writing this command on the command line, like even copy and pasting it sucks. I don't like that because I generally like to have my pasteboard full of other things, not commands. So what we can do is we're going to take this command and instead translate that into something called a dockercompose file. And dockercompose is this addition, expanded functionality to Docker that is very useful, and we're going to be using a fraction of its power, but that fraction is more than enough for us right now. And basically what we're saying is we're going to create an application called RStudio. It is going to be running the Rocker RStudio latest image. We're going to be using the env file. We're going to expose port 87, and we're going to use the same volume mount as we had before. Slightly different syntax. We can get into more details on that stuff later. But basically, everything that's in here gets translated into here in some way. Think of this as a slightly longer way to write this command, where we're defining all of the options and flags in a file rather than as part of the command line. But what that gets us is instead docker compose up is all that I have to run. And we can see it's thinking, it's ready. I can refresh RStudio, foobar, sign in, and everything is there. Just real quick, if I were to change this file name, or to change the path where it gets mounted, and fire it up again, we'll see that like the folder name has changed. So it is actually taking the options from this file. But while I'm demonstrating that, does anyone have any questions in these last 3 minutes?
Yeah, I have 2 questions. So one, the ephemeral option of -rm, is that also included in the Docker Compose implicitly, or do you need to do that explicitly? And then also what if, go ahead.
Yeah, I forgot to put that one in because I almost never actually use that one.
And then so what's happening is whatever your current working directory is, if you use the command docker compose, that will look in your current working directory for a file that's called dockercompose.yaml and use that, or what's happening?
Correct. So I ran that command from this directory, from inside Docker Compose, and it found this file.
So it needs to be called exactly that, or it has some sort of
Docker-compose.yml. Yes. Yeah. If we had more time, I would talk about Docker Compose override, but that is a topic for a different time. Other questions? So the entire point of this is like, Docker is a very powerful tool that includes a lot of functionality for communication between your host computer and the Docker container, right? The little computer running inside your computer. Specifying all of those options every time you want to spin up a new container sucks. Instead, what you can do is put all of those options into a Docker Compose file and then run the same command every time. And basically you're putting into code what you want your interface to look like.
Can you pass the name of a Docker Compose YAML file as an option to the Docker Compose command so that you
Absolutely. So, so I don't have multiple for this one, but as an example, here is the old data store project that has 5 different Docker Compose files for different purposes.
Cool. And it's gonna make as a comment, kind of spell out what my brain capture from the meetup to see how I'm pretty new to Docker and Docker Compose, so I may, if you allow me, like in maybe a minute or less, I should be kind of going through all that we saw and see from my perspective. So. I think that so far we learned that Docker gives us these little computers that we don't have to build because someone else like you, Alex, or like someone like the Rocker project may build for us. If they're useful, we're going to use them. So we have to type a bunch of things in the terminal, and that's something that we may not be super comfortable with. So now with Docker Compose, which seems to be an extension of Docker as a tool, we can have that description of the computer that we want to use in a file that we don't have to write because someone else like you, Alex, may have written for us. So what I see here is a tool where you can share with me a whole computer system just with one text file that I can read or not. All I need to know is to type docker-compose up, and whatever computer you build in there will magically appear in my, gonna manifest itself. Is that a more or less a simplified summary?
I think that's a very accurate summary, yeah. I see Monica has a hand.
Yeah, I have a selfish question. So, like, there are a lot of things that I'm learning at the moment. Also, I want to learn, and I try to understand for my work how, like, is learning Docker really important at the moment? Like, are we planning to use it in some way in our workflows, and if yes, will it affect my work?
Okay. So putting on my tech lead hat here for a minute. The short answer is I would very much hope that we start using this more. For a number of reasons. One being it reduces the cost of debugging, right? So we were talking last week of you get an error when you're writing some code, you want other people to look at it. Like, if they run the code and they don't get the error, what is the problem there? Do they have a different version of a package on their machine? Do they have something weird about their machine, or is it something in how they wrote the code? Using Docker doesn't entirely eliminate, but mostly eliminates that. Is the machine different, right? Is the environment in which they're running it different? The second reason to do it is because if we want to really have any sort of automated testing in any sort of scale, right? Whether we want it or not, GitHub Actions is already running our code inside Docker containers. We could control what Docker containers it is running it inside of, right? We could minimize what is needed in there so that it doesn't like reduce our GitHub Actions minutes, basically, because we won't have to spin up so many things just in order to get the thing that we actually want. So it's useful for automated systems, it's useful for debugging, and ultimately I'm hoping it'll be useful at the user level, where an analyst can just open up this mythical Pacta and Friends Docker container and just start running, right? They don't need to worry about how do I install Pacta, what is the file structure, have I copied down all of my repos fresh, like all of that just gets taken care of.
That actually sounds like the most relevant use case for, like from my side, thinking about supervisors. Because I have heard that apparently they were sometimes like even looking for ways to run something in Docker. So given that they normally take 500 years to get even one single package, that sounds like a use case where that could possibly be easier.
Yeah. I mean that is definitely a IT teams generally are more open to having Docker containers than necessarily like running on the bare metal machine, because you do have these options of everything is closed by default unless you explicitly open it, right? We had to explicitly expose port 87 for us to be able to communicate on it. And so what that means is like, if I were some nefarious person and I put code into the pack to code that would like call home and download all the portfolios that someone ran to my personal server, right? Well, we hand a Docker image over to some bank and that can't call home anymore. It doesn't have the network connectivity unless that is explicitly granted.
Sorry, Alex, just be mindful we are 6 minutes beyond the half hour. I'm not sure if what other kind of commitments people have, but it could be a good time to wrap up.
Yeah, probably a good idea. So, thank you everyone. As always, you got questions, I'm sure I can fumble my way through answers. So, hit me up on Slack. Talk to you later.
Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. Ciao.